This is part 7 in the Craftsman 150 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 6, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we're going to be prepping, priming, and painting most of the cast parts, as well as reassembling the Jacob's chuck. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff, and welcome to my shop. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Now that we have a sanded and polished table, we're going to go ahead and mask the areas that we sanded. So I'm just going to apply, this is 1/2 inch blue painter's tape, and I'm going to box around the table surface. Just get it lined up with the outer edge of that table as best as possible. And I actually forgot to do it here, but you should also place tape over those holes that go through the table so that the paint won't come through from the back side when we paint the table. So we'll find out just how big of a problem that's become when we go to remove all this masking later on. But normally I remember to tape over them. So for large areas, I use this wax paper. You can get a big thing of it from Sam's Club or Costco. And I just cut it to fit and then tape it down. And now I'm masking the inside of the column bore. So all of the bores in every piece of the casting, whether it's the table, the head, or the base, we need to mask. And then once we've got it masked on the inside, I'm just going to use an X-Acto knife and make slits in the tape that's protruding from the top and then bend it over. Because we went to all that trouble to polish the boss on this bore, so we want to make sure that we don't paint it. Then after we've got the inside of the bore done, we're going to come back and mask over the top of it. And then I'm going to do basically the opposite that we did with the bore tape. I'm going to make slits in this tape, the part that overhangs the bore, and bend them down into the bore. Like so. And then we'll just use the X-Acto knife to cut around the outside edge of the bore and trim that tape up. Like so. So this is me masking the boss for the chuck key. I'm not going to worry about the inside of that bore for the chuck key. So now we're going to do the inside of the bores for the lock. And I'm looking down inside the column hole to see where that tape is protruding on the inside. And then we just expand it and get it to adhere. And then fill that last piece of gap. Well, trim it on the inside. It's kind of irregular on the inside, so just be smart with how you're doing it so you're not spending 2 days trimming and masking. And now I'm trimming the outside. And we'll do the other half of the lock bore on the right side the same way. And then we're going to have a bore on the bottom for the column that we need to mask as well. And this bore, we just need the inside of it masked. We don't need to worry about the outside of it. And then once we're done with the table, we're going to do the base the same way. So again, we're just going to box off the milled surface on the base. And again, I forgot to cover the holes, but after you've done that, you'll just cut the paper, wax paper or whatever, and mask off the table itself. Now we're doing the bore for the column. And we did that column bore just like we did on the table. So the inside of it and the top. And here we are on the head. There are a lot of bores in the head that we have to mask. And they can be challenging to get to. Some of them are deeper down inside the casting than others. But just take your time, do a good job. All of this masking hard work will pay off. There are 2 bores for the pinion, the one on this outside edge, and then there's one deeper in the casting. I want to paint the area between those 2 bores so I don't just mask the entire sleeve all the way through. I mask each one of the bores and leave the center unmasked. And the reason why I want to paint it is so that it won't rust. And the column bores. Pretty much every single bore that we cleaned up with a bottle brush, we're now masking. And now we're applying the primer. So this is a metal etching primer. I believe it's Rust-Oleum. You can get it at, you can probably get it at Walmart, but most of the time you can find it at the big box home improvement stores as well as auto parts stores. And we're just making sure we apply a really good coat to this side of the table. And then we're going to wait about 15 minutes, and then we can handle it and flip it and apply the other side. So if you think about when you're painting something, you want to be able to move it so that you can work on the next piece. So we did not apply the primer to the bottom yet, and now we can prime the base. And we're doing, again, the same thing that we did to the table. And I normally paint the bottom side of these, prime them and paint them on the bottom first, and then do the top last. That way, if it gets marred up from moving around or whatever, it's the bottom side that'll be marred up. So again, we didn't go all the way down on the sides, and we didn't paint the bottom side so that we can move it. And now we're going to do the head. And the only reason why we're doing the top of the head first is because that gives us the easiest access to the inside of the head. And it's going to require a lot of primer, and you're going to have to spray it at a distance in some areas. So it's going to go kind of thick in there. That means it's going to take longer to dry. Now on the head, we're going to go ahead and prime the outside of it all the way down to the bottom, but not on the bottom yet. There's a lot of geometry on the outside of the head, so just make sure you're getting good coverage. So after about 15 minutes, we can flip these parts and do the bottom side of all of them, or the top side, depending on how you think about it. After we've got all the parts primed, we're going to wait an additional 15 minutes, and then we can start applying paint. We're going to apply the paint in the same manner that we did the primer. For this drill press, I chose Rust-Oleum metallic champagne bronze. It's paint number 313142, and it's a metallic paint. So unlike some people who like to go several light coats, I go with kind of a medium coat, and I usually just apply one coat. If I see some defect in the surface after it's dried, I'll apply a second coat, but normally just one coat. So now we're applying the paint to the base. And then we can move it. Like I said, the same process as we did with the primer. So we left most of the sides and the bottom side unpainted. Now we're doing the inside of the head. Making sure that there's good coverage on all of the interior. Then we're applying it to the outside of the head. And I'm sure there's a ton of videos out there on how to spray paint. So if this is something you're not good at and you want to get better, just watch a couple of those videos. But it's not difficult. So we will let that stuff sit for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, we come back and flip those parts and finish painting them. You may notice that I've got wax paper on the 2x4s that all these parts are sitting on. And I'll change out that wax paper between each part because it's going to get paint on it. And this will keep the freshly painted parts that are sitting on the wax paper from getting marred up. Now, if for whatever reason your paint is still tacky from the previous 24-hour paint, then you need to wait another 24 hours or so. It should be completely dry to the touch and should not be tacky in any way, and you should be able to handle it. And I'm in Georgia. We've got 100% humidity when I'm doing this, and it's 92 degrees outside. So, 24 hours should be enough. So I forgot to do the motor mount. So here I am priming the motor mount. Again, it's just Rust-Oleum metal etching primer. And after 15 minutes, we can apply the paint. And it's the same paint, that metallic champagne bronze. And then we're going to let all these parts cure for about 72 hours or 3 days. So while all that's curing, here we are at the Jacobs chuck. And I'm trying to show you the jaws. If you recall, I honed those jaws. And pay special note of that end that I'm touching right there. That's going to be key when we go to assemble this thing. So if you recall, we did not coat the body of the Jacobs chuck with the super lube. And that's because we wanted to be able to clean out the inside of that body with this cotton buffing pad. So I'm using a Fordham, but that's just an expensive Dremel. And just run it up inside each one of these channels that the jaws ride in. You can see how dirty it is already. And that's after this thing is soaked in simple green 2 times and derusted 2 times. So you can get all crazy and polish the inside of that if you wanted to, but I just hit it with this cotton wheel and then I'm ready to go. So now we're going down the back side of those same channels. And those edges are really sharp. They kept tearing up my rubber gloves, so pretty soon here you're going to see me just pull the gloves off. And then we're going to just clean the inside of the socket on there as well. This is where the chuck mates with the spindle on the Jacobs taper, and it's got to be a near perfect fit. So we want to make sure it's clean. And then we're just going to use some compressed air to blow out all of that cotton fuzz that came off of that cotton wheel. So here I'm going to show you that on the body of the chuck, at each one of these channels, you can see that 1, there's a 2, and then there's a 3. I've seen them marked with just like 1 line, 2 lines, and 3 lines as well, but that's the order in which those jaws need to go back inside the chuck. So we're using the Mystic JT6. It's an LGI number 2 grease that has moly in it, 3% moly. It's actually a high temp grease. Not that we need a high temp, but it has everything we need in it. So it's black, so it doesn't really stand out. And I'm just using a Q-tip to apply it to those channels that the jaws ride in. And you don't have to get a ton in there. Just a light coating of it will be fine. And this gets messy. You just go into it knowing it's going to be messy. So again, I'm just showing you the jaws that I honed. That whole flat part there that's shiny. And now we're just lubing the inside of the split ring with the Mystic as well. So you can apply a little bit of lube to the teeth that are on each one of those jaws if you want, but the lubing of this ring kind of does that for you. So that's all you need to lube on this chuck, is those channels that the jaws ride in, and then the ring itself, the split ring. So here's a close-up, and these jaws are in order of how they need to go in the chuck. And the key to remember here is that the top, as we're looking at them right now, the first full tooth on each one of those jaws needs to be in a cascading position. So the one on the left is at the highest point, the one in the middle's in a middle position, and the one on the bottom is at its lowest point. And that's that last full tooth. Don't worry about the partial teeth that are up there. Just look at the last full tooth on each one of those jaws and make sure you have them in that order, cascading. And so that first one is going to go in the number 1 slot on the body. The second one will go in the number 2 slot on the body. And the third one will go in the number 3 slot on the body. So we're just going to wipe our hands again. And then we're going to put the first jaw in the number 1 slot on the body with the teeth facing out. Now you might have to twist it left and right or rotate it on its axis left and right to get it in there, but once it's in there it should slide in no problem. And then the second jaw. And then the third jaw. Now there are probably 100 different ways to do this, where you can line up the jaws all the way retracted or all the way forward to get these rings to go on there, but I have yet to figure it out. So for me, I start the jaws about sticking out about 1/4 of an inch out of the chuck, and then I start putting the rings on there, and then I'll spin the rings around the body of the chuck until they really grab inside the teeth of the jaws. And once you get it, like you can see, I'm really struggling with it here, but once they line up, it will spin smooth, smooth. And then once you get it, it will just go. There's no way for me to really explain it. You got to kind of do it to feel what it feels like. And then once you get it, there it is. So when you spin these all the way out, all three of those jaws should come together and they should be completely flush. And if they are, then you've got everything put together correctly. So what I do is I run those jaws back down so that they only protrude from the chuck about 3/8 of an inch. And here we are lubing up the inside of the sleeve. And once we've got that lubed, we're going to slide it over the chuck body. And that should capture the split ring to keep it from coming off. And now we go over to the press. So all the jaws are even on the end, and that's the gap we've got to get that sleeve over. So again, you just use a piece of coupling pipe or something that's roughly the same outside diameter and inside diameter of the sleeve. Put it in a vise and then line it all up and squeeze it together. Now make sure that whatever you're using is longer than the teeth protruding on the end of the chuck. And right there, it's locked in place. So the back end of the chuck will have just a little bit of so you should be able to spin the sleeve by hand and completely close and open the chuck jaws. And that'll wrap up video number 7. Part 8 coming soon. If you enjoyed this or found it helpful, please like and subscribe. I appreciate all support, and I will see you next time.